Welcome. My name's Julia Fogelin and I'm a professional learning consultant with the International Centre for Leadership in Education. We're really pleased you can be with us today and we're looking forward to this session on understanding scaffolding. This 15-minute tutorial is intended to be a small manageable chunk of information to guide instructional effectiveness. At the end of this course, you should be able to take these strategies on scaffolding and begin to integrate them into your teaching practices. Let's get started. Today's objectives are: what are the benefits of scaffolding? And exploring different ways of scaffolding to help our students. Grab a cup of coffee. Take the 15 minutes to invest in teaching practices. You deserve it. In education, scaffolding is the term used for a variety of instructional techniques, which we use to move students progressively towards stronger understanding and, of course, ultimately greater independence in their learning process. Like the type of scaffolding we might use if we were building or repairing a property, teachers provide successive levels of temporary support that can help students reach higher levels of comprehension and skill acquisition that they would not be able to achieve without assistance. So, in the same way as in the construction industry, in an educational setting, the scaffolding strategies we use with our students are gradually removed when they're no longer needed, and the teacher slowly gives more responsibility over the learning process to the students themselves. Scaffolding is something we do with all our students to a greater or lesser extent, and is widely considered to be an essential element of effective teaching. One really important use of scaffolding is to bridge a learning gap. That is the difference between what students have learned and what they're expected to know and to be able to do at a certain point in their education. Scaffolding can also help to reduce the negative emotions and the self-perceptions that students may experience when they get frustrated, intimidated, or discouraged when attempting a difficult task. By providing different forms of help with increased direction and greater understanding, they can become more confident and able participants in the activities, and of course have the satisfaction of completing the task themselves. The diagram we can see here was created by Xavier Teacher College and visualises the transitions that students make from where they are now to where we hope they will be. We can help them through those tricky areas by preparing, guiding and challenging them, and thereby take them forward to build a solid foundation for future learning. All the time we're aiming to take them towards those quad D abilities of independence and creativity. We're going to move on later in this presentation to look more closely at 6 practical strategies for scaffolding through modelling and discussion. But first of all, let's consider why we should use scaffolding with our students. As we said, scaffolding is, in essence, a way of meeting our students where they are now in their learning progression. We recognise the varying degrees of understanding and participation in our learners and modify and adapt our tasks and especially our language to help them achieve success. Our aim is to give them the ability to complete the task, whatever it might be, themselves. And the most important thing to remember is that scaffolding in a particular area is just a temporary measure to help the student understand so that they can work in the same way alone. Our focus should be on gradually releasing the responsibility with the I do, we do, you do model. Let's look at this in a different way. Many of you may be familiar with the Rigour and Relevance framework from Dr. Bill Daggett from your previous 15-minute strategies video, which focuses exclusively on this framework. We all see the value in Bloom's taxonomy as a way of driving towards higher levels of thinking. Bloom's, however, is only a portion of this framework, because without relevance, students do not make a connection to the content and therefore the level of thinking is limited. Let's have a look at the framework. The left column is Bloom's taxonomy. But what we know is that relevance, relevant content, relevant questioning make it possible for students to achieve rigour. That is what we call the application model. This This becomes increasingly important when we address questioning strategies in our scaffolding practices and in our efforts to get students to be able to apply their language skills in a real-world, unpredictable situation in Quad D. Also, please note in the framework who is doing the work in each quadrant. You can see here in Quad A that this is the only quadrant the teacher is working. In every other quadrant, the student is doing the work. Each quadrant shows you how we can gradually help the students using scaffolding. At this point, it's helpful to step back and look at the differences between differentiation and scaffolding. Scaffolding refers to modifications you make while designing and teaching lessons, based on the immediate response of your students, and this allows them to be successful in learning the same content. Differentiation refers to the idea of modifying instruction to meet students' needs and learning styles. Scaffolding is often directed at individual students, while differentiation can often be pre-prepared work done for small groups. In reality, differentiation and scaffolding strategies overlap, but they have the same ultimate goal: increasing student success. Before, we mentioned we were going to look at some key scaffolding strategies in a more practical way. The ones we thought might be useful are sentence stems, a survey activity, a vocabulary and grammar activity, a sequencing activity, and we're going to ask our students to think like detectives, and then finally we're going to ask them to take over as teacher. In this vocabulary exercise, the students look at the scenario and the text and are led through a series of tasks where they need to first consider the meaning of the questions, create some alternative vocabulary, and then use it in their own sentences. Through substituting the vocabulary they supply, they're able to use it for further sentence structures. First of all, the students are asked, what qualities make the protagonist or the main character of a story a hero? At the beginning of this activity, we're asking the students to predict the type of adjectives we might use to describe Theseus. The answers are the adjectives in the activity sentence. This is the starting point for the students to start thinking about substituting these adjectives for new ones. Let's think about what each of these words means. One way to do that is to think of synonyms for the words. What are some of the synonyms for courageous? What does a synonym mean? The students have previously learnt synonym, so it could be a review activity. We could also ask the student to break down the word synonym into two parts and come up with the answer, syno, same, nym, name, as a last resort clue to identify that it means the same name. For example, a word that has the same meaning. In asking them to volunteer some more words which mean the same as courageous in this context, the students could typically come up with words like brave, daring, fearless. What are the synonyms for strong? Powerful, tough, muscular? And what are some of the synonyms for honourable? Honest, upright, right-minded. And finally, what are some of the synonyms for intelligent? And they could come up with something like smart or clever or brilliant. At any point that the student struggles with the adjectives used here, we could ask the question, what do you think an honourable, intelligent, etc. person is like? To scaffold the activity and make it more accessible. We could scaffold further with a further example. I know an intelligent person, they know everything about, etc. In this survey activity, we could ask our students to make a poster of the type of questions they can ask to find out more about someone. Preparing in advance helps them to think through what they're going to say, and this type of scaffolding is useful in lots of activities, as very often students find it hard to answer immediately, and that extra bit of preparation time makes them much more confident. Here are some suggestions of the type of questions they might think about including. In this next activity, working with vocabulary and grammar, the students have examples of sentences with vocabulary words or with some grammar words the students are working with. These can be useful because they can see a model and then they can use it as a template for their own writing or speaking. It's important to use examples that are of interest to the students. You may know that your student likes basketball, or watching movies, or travel. This makes the scaffolding relevant and will create a much more engaging learning environment. Using a template, for example, a letter or a speech, or how a text can be ordered, is useful scaffolding so that students get a feel for how information can be put together. The scaffolding in this exercise takes the form of giving a choice of a limited number of key vocabulary words and templates to prepare structure and key information. First of all, the student will go on to prepare their speech. Initially, the students are led through decisions about whether the speech is formal or informal. They're then asked to think about more words that they will use in the context of their chosen piece of work. Explain to students that their speech should include main points with information about the topic. Remind the students to include details that explain why this word is important. Suggest that they think about a great opening line to introduce their speech, and encourage students to think of an equally strong ending for their speech. Point out that the ending should be as interesting as the opening, and explain that they can repeat the main topic for the closing sentence. Using these templates help to focus the students' activities in the appropriate areas, and it helps them to produce a more cohesive and complete piece of work. In this next activity, we want the students to think like a detective. We get the students to find out things themselves, for example, a word with related forms or usage, and then ask them to be the teacher and share their knowledge with you. In their personal word chart, they can find a word they've read about or heard and what they think it might mean. They go on to do some research by looking up a definition and then practice the work by including it in a sentence. Let's think about how we change the balance of power with our students and encourage them to take a much more active role. Our students often expect us to be the ones with all the answers. The downside of too much teacher talk is that they can sit back and not try very hard. Try saying, "I don't know, what do you think? Can you help me?" and see what response you get. This strategy empowers the students to share what they know. This can also be a great activity to do at the beginning of a lesson to assess prerequisite skills needed to be successful in this lesson. Give students time to talk to you. The time that they get to share enables them to consider their ideas and be much more prepared to answer a question or do a task. Going over their ideas a few times and building every time makes the task more meaningful to them and is also great training for their future work in any subject area. Think about the planning for your lesson. This may be in a one-on-one environment or it may be in a whole group environment. Think about your lesson openers. Will they get the students to engage in the task? We've covered a lot of content in our teacher strategies, and I hope this has been helpful to you. Reflecting on our present practices and on what does and doesn't work always helps us to create a toolkit of strategies and resources you're better prepared to use to meet all your learners where they are. So with this in mind, let's quickly review what we considered today. By using scaffolding with our students, it helps us to do a number of things. It helps us to both use the target language in an authentic way to solve a problem. It encourages the learner to consider and try out ideas in a non-threatening environment, modelling a process that the learner can try themselves to problem solve, making them far more self-sufficient. It also provides a meaningful learning environment which is far more significant and lasting than simply supplying the answer. We've enjoyed sharing these 15-minute teaching strategies with you, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon.